Hello to all our Movie Club friends, welcome! Today we're going to take a deep dive into Guillermo del Toro's new film, The New Frankenstein. Finally, after a long time, a good film has been made that we can sit down and discuss deeply together. Because the director has a distinctive style, and he has beautifully told the story in the film. Those who watched the film realized how full of symbolism it was. We want to see what message the director wanted to deliver to his audience. He did that by changing the story of Frankenstein. Guillermo del Toro has said that this film is essentially my autobiography, and that I put what I truly believe in into this film. I'm giving you a spoiler warning for this film. And now it's better to quickly get into it. The most important point of the film, which is actually the backbone of the story, is that Mia Goth played two roles in this film. She played both Elizabeth and Victor's mother. The director intentionally did this to show Victor's obsession with his mother, to show how it affected his life. It means that when he grew up, he essentially fell in love with his mother again when he saw Elizabeth. And if you pay attention, she is a love he can never truly have, because when he was a child, he always had conflicts with his father. And when he became an adult, Elizabeth was there for him, but in both cases his brother took his love away from him. That is, the birth of his brother caused his mother to die, and Elizabeth's marriage to his brother prevented him from reaching his love. That's why throughout the story we constantly see Victor drinking milk. If you noticed, there were more than 10 scenes emphasized by the director, where characters were talking and suddenly a tray of milk would appear in the frame. Basically, whenever we saw Victor, he was either drinking milk or there was a glass of milk on the table. This means Victor has always remained a child. He was never able to enter adulthood. That's why he was both jealous and behaved childishly. For example, out of jealousy he would set a building on fire. Then he would immediately regret it, go to save the monster, and put himself in danger. But in the story, the original and great sin, the thing from which everything started and that shaped all this tragedy, begins with Victor's father. The first image is crafted with great precision. If you pay attention, all the clothes are black and white. No other color is used except for Victor's mother, who is entirely dressed in red. From this point on, we understand that the color red in the story symbolizes Victor's mother. And it is also a symbol of Victor's obsession. That means whenever we see Victor associated with the color red, it shows that the tragedy of his mother's death in childhood is influencing his behavior. The father enters the frame dressed in the same black and white color. On his hat there is a symbol of a hand pointing toward the sky. This symbol was used during the Victorian era. It was used by government and official authorities. It meant that the work I am doing or the power I have is granted by God. Popes, mayors, kings, doctors, sheriffs, all of them had this symbol on their clothing. So here we understand that Victor's father symbolizes a religious believer. But Victor's hand is very different from his father's hand. This hand has no belief in God. It has no morality at all. He gets funding for his research from someone who makes money from war. He experiments on the dismembered corpses of soldiers without any mercy. And afterward, he throws their remains away like garbage. Only science matters to him. Nothing else matters to him in reaching his goal. We said the father symbolizes religious people, and because of that belief, he respects death. But he can never show the love he has to his own child. As a result, his child does not go through childhood properly. Instead of choosing his father as his guide, he creates an imaginary angel in his mind, and that angel is also colored red. As we said, red always symbolizes Victor's mother. This shows that this angel was created in his mind because of that obsession. But this angel is connected to his mother only in Victor's mind. In reality, it has nothing to do with his mother. In fact, the night Victor saw that angel in his dream was the night he, as a human being, accepted that he is part of the cycle of life. To reach his goal, he decided he would do whatever it takes. We need to see when we first saw this angel. It was when Victor said for the first time that he would defeat death. In fact, they created an image in the form of an angel to represent the idea in Victor's mind.
It would come and offer seductive suggestions, specifically the defeat of death. But at the end of the story, when it removed its mask, it turned out that the real death was that very idea itself. Now, when did it remove its mask?
At the moment it caused Elizabeth's death. Now Victor grows up. At this point in the story, Elizabeth enters the narrative. As I said, the actress is the same one who played the mother, but if you pay attention to the color of her clothes, they are designed exactly opposite to the mother's. Her clothes are mostly blue or green, and we said that Victor did not respect the cycle of life. He said, "I will stop death." But if you look at Elizabeth's clothes, the blue and green colors are inspired by insects. And if you remember, insects were referenced several times in the film. When she went to the market to buy books, she bought a book about the life of insects. Or she was very fascinated by butterflies. Or in another scene, we saw her playing with beetles. And Elizabeth's blue dress was inspired by the pattern of butterfly wings, and the green one was inspired by the shell of colorful beetles. She was always portrayed in sunlight. Throughout the story, if you notice, sunlight was always associated with the mother and Elizabeth. For example, when they sat at the dinner table, sunlight was always shining directly into the camera lens. And this was repeated many times with Elizabeth. There were many examples of this kind of symbolism in the film. For example, the capitalist character in the story was always portrayed in snow and rain. Wherever he appeared, there was a cold and lifeless atmosphere. The immoral capitalist was depicted as completely cold in the story. We said that Elizabeth loved insects. What does that mean? What was the director's message? In her dialogue, Elizabeth says how fascinating it is that from a dead and decayed plant, a new creature, a butterfly, is born. This is called the cycle of life. It means something dies and from it something else is born. And the butterfly itself is a symbol of growth and reaching maturity. Elizabeth saw this beauty. She is exactly the opposite of Victor. Victor wants to destroy the cycle of life. He cannot accept that he will die and that from his death a new being will be born. That's why Elizabeth was constantly in conflict with Victor, and they were always arguing with each other. Later on, Victor creates the monster. Notice that the monster is completely posed in the style of Christ crucified. That is, he is meant to rise from death in the style of Christ's resurrection, with the difference that the cross he rises from is made of mechanical parts. It is no longer made of simple wood. And this is not something random. It is completely rooted in Guillermo del Toro's own beliefs, and it is also rooted in the message of the original Frankenstein novel, which we will examine later. The monster is There are very interesting subtle details in the production design. First of all, pay attention to Victor's gloves. As we said, hands are emphasized a lot in the film, and if you remember, the bloody hand symbolized the death of Victor's mother. And now Victor's hands, with those red gloves, look exactly like a doctor delivering a baby, as if they are completely covered in blood, as if he has given birth to the monster with his own hands. And we said that red always symbolized Victor's psychological wound. Here it shows how his mother's death led him to create this monster. Opposite the monster, the image of Medusa is carved on the wall, a woman who herself became a victim of the god's wrath. In mythology, Medusa was originally innocent. Her beauty caused Athena's jealousy, and she condemned Medusa to an eternal curse. What curse? That anyone who looks into her eyes turns to stone, meaning they are neither killed nor remain alive. Rather, they remain in a state between death and life. This is exactly the monster's fate in Del Toro's film. A being who is created and first of all is condemned to loneliness and isolation. Everyone is afraid of him. No one can approach him. On the other hand, he is innocent, and he cannot even experience death himself. So in the laboratory, Medusa is essentially a mirror of the monster's fate. Many of these kinds of production design tricks are used throughout the film, and it wouldn't be surprising if the film is nominated for Best Production Design at the upcoming Oscars. For example, the capitalist character, the first time we see him in his house, is recreating a memento mori image with a camera. What is that? It is a very famous painting that features a skull. It is also a very old painting, created several centuries ago. The painter's purpose in creating it was to say, "Always remember death," meaning that anyone who hangs it on their wall will be reminded each time they see it that one day death will come for them. Now, in the characterization of this capitalist, he is doing exactly. He has syphilis, meaning he is dying. But notice that he is adding something to the painting. He adds the image of a nude woman holding a peach to the painting. The peach symbolizes lust, so in his characterization, we understand that he thinks about death, but at the same time thinks about material life. He is not going to let go of the world so easily. For example, the tower was designed in a way that made it seem as if it were dying. There were also many other interesting details. For example, Guillermo del Toro himself said that when we were creating the monster in the makeup room, I told them to make one of his eyes larger than the other, and whenever we wanted to show love or calmness in the monster's eyes, we reflected a light in the larger eye, so that the audience's attention would be drawn to that eye, and whenever we wanted to show anger, we moved the camera angle to the left and showed the monster's face from the smaller eye side.
Because the monster had two sides to his personality. He was very dangerous and savage. He could skin wolves. And on the other hand, he could forgive his creator. And these two different aspects of his personality were shown through his two different eyes. Interesting.
The first time we see the monster, the story is told from Victor's perspective, meaning Victor is narrating the story. And in the story, Victor tells about himself. He remembers himself as a very hard-working scientist. He is very gentlemanly, well-mannered, and has no accent. In a way, he presents himself as the victim of the story he is telling. Meanwhile, the monster appears paler and more grotesque, and he also seems colder. But in the second half of the story, when the monster narrates, the same events are told from his perspective. And this time the monster's makeup changes. His face has more color, and overall, he appears more human, more intelligent, and more curious. In fact, he learns everything very quickly. And the true victim of the story is the monster, and Victor is extremely arrogant. And if you noticed, the actor's accent suddenly changes. He sounds like someone who is disgusted every time he faces the monster. From this point on, after the monster is born, the story enters a mystical phase. We need to pay attention to the message of the Frankenstein novel as well. Otherwise, we might interpret the film the wrong way. From here on, in the story, we have a creator and a creation.
The story is very similar to the story of Adam and God, and a sentence that has occupied the human mind for thousands of years is repeated many times in the film, when he says to his creator, "Why did you create me?" Or, "Why did you abandon me?"
Victor, in a way, symbolizes God, but he is not God. Elizabeth represents the true God, which we will explain later. And the monster symbolizes all human beings, because the monster has certain characteristics. First of all, he is created without choosing it himself. Then his creator rejects him, and he wanders the earth to find his destiny. Just like Adam, who was expelled from paradise, the scene where the monster wandered in nature and fed the deer. It was directly inspired by old paintings of the fall of Adam. And if you remember, when the monster went to the old man's house, he learned to read and write from the book Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is about Adam and Eve and what happened to them. So with these clues, we understand that the monster represents humanity.
The old man was able to guide the monster because he had no sight to judge him, meaning the monster was saved because he was not judged. And that wise man gave the monster an important lesson, which had a deep impact at the end of the story.
He said that forgiveness is the whole of wisdom, and we see at the end of the story what effect it has. But we said that Victor is not a symbol of God. Even though he is the creator if we interpret the story superficially, We could say Victor symbolizes
He
created mankind, and then he cast him away, and that outcast human went through the path of humanity, until finally he confronted God. And here, the human became better than God. He forgave God, and the real monster of the story was God. And when God died, humanity reached salvation. But if we interpret the story this way, it is wrong, because it contradicts the Frankenstein novel, and it also contradicts Guillermo del Toro's previous films. So here, the director's interviews become very important. The original Frankenstein novel was essentially a critique of the Age of Enlightenment. The novel was written in the 19th century. The Enlightenment began after the crimes committed by religion and the church.
It was a time when humanity decided to separate its path from God and take power away from the church. The church committed so many wrongs that people said humanity can provide for its own needs and eventually find answers to its own questions.
We do not need a God to answer our questions. In the early days, when humanity followed this path, it began to progress very rapidly, whereas for centuries the church had blocked progress. But after some time, humanity realized something important, that without morality, science can create serious problems. In the book Frankenstein, Victor symbolizes a person who wants to take God's place, and on the other hand, he has no morality. His only goal is absolute science, and the result is the creation of a monster that brings only tragedy. And in the end, it also leads Victor himself to death. It was a warning from the author of Frankenstein that if after setting religion aside you focus only on science, you may ultimately drown in your own mistakes. The novel Frankenstein is far more tragic than the film.
At the end of the novel, the monster cannot find Victor alive. When he reaches the ship, Victor is dead, and he leaves the ship in despair, and he decides to kill himself. In the novel, the monster is not immortal. He can die, and he decides to burn himself alive.
The novel is extremely dark and tragic, and it wants to show that science without morality can be just as dangerous as corrupted religion. And now you can understand why the cross from which the monster was born was made of mechanical parts. Because here science was taking the place of God. But the important question is, who is God then? We said Victor symbolizes a human who wants to take God's place. To find God, we must listen to Guillermo del Toro's interview. Because this director has added a concept of God to the story based on his own beliefs, something that had a different characterization in the novel. That is, the character of Elizabeth. If you remember, after the monster is created,
Elizabeth goes to see him for the first time, and once again the story emphasizes hands. When Elizabeth reaches her hand toward the monster, their fingers come close to each other, and it evokes the famous painting, The Creation of Adam by Michelangelo.
The same painting that is in the Vatican. With this image, and with the director's own emphasis, we understand that Elizabeth symbolizes God. But who is this God? The character of Elizabeth took shape in Del Toro's mind when he was 33 years
Del
old.
Toro was born into a strict Catholic family, a family with very strong religious beliefs, especially his father, who was very strict. This strict father figure appears in many of Del Toro's films. For example, Captain Vital in Pan's Labyrinth. But later,
Del Toro became disillusioned with religion because he said he used to have nightmares about hell. They frightened me so much about God. And then I became interested in the world of monsters.
and I realized that the monsters I read about in stories were better than the God presented in church. And over time, he became an atheist. The director's main argument was that because suffering exists in the world, there is no God.
But something important happens when he is 33 years old. While he was in Mexico, mafia groups kidnapped his father because he was a wealthy businessman. The kidnappers demanded money from the director, but he didn't have enough to pay
Then
them.
the news reaches James Cameron, the director of Titanic. He pays the full ransom, and Guillermo del Toro's father is released. When del Toro sees this act of kindness, he asks himself, where did this humanity come from? If there is no God or nothing beyond human beings, how can empathy and humanity exist among us?
So he arrives at a new way of
He
thinking.
describes himself as a believing non-believer, meaning he belongs to no religion but still believes in God. He says that God is right here among us when we show empathy toward each other. His main point
Don't
is
search for God only in the heavens. God exists precisely between us. The character of Elizabeth is built precisely on these same ideas. This character has several main traits. The most important one is that she empathizes with everyone and truly understands.
Remember I said that Del Toro believed you could see his life story in the film. If you paid attention, Elizabeth carried Christian symbols. She had actually come from a convent. She had lived there for a while, but later she left
This
it.
directly reflects the director's own life. He was once Christian, but he didn't find answers to his questions there, so he left it. The director says that whenever empathy disappears from between people, trouble begins. And in the story, if you notice,
Every time Elizabeth left, something bad happened. For example, the first time she left, Victor and his uncle planned to reanimate dead body parts. Or when she was absent, they created the creature. Or when she was thrown out of the mansion, Victor blew up the
and
building.
later, when she was killed, Victor's path toward destruction truly began. She is the exact opposite of the angel inside Victor's mind. In the end, since Victor is the real monster of the story, he kills Elizabeth. At the moment of her
Elizabeth was dressed entirely in white, symbolizing innocence. After her death, her dress turns completely red, resembling the color of Victor's mother's dress. In other words,
The path he began to save his mother ultimately ended with him metaphorically killing her again. He became exactly the monster he never wanted to be. He became completely like his father. He punished the creature in the same way his father had
and
punished
just as he believed his father caused his mother's death, he himself caused Elizabeth's death. This is where the final act of the story begins. Now it is time for destinies to be decided. Elizabeth's death causes both the creature and Victor to chase each other to the horizon. What does horizon mean? It represents the ultimate end of everything. There is a famous saying that God is beyond the horizon.
And the ship that was trapped in the ice was named Horizon. The creature truly goes beyond the horizon to meet his God. Their meeting becomes the central message of the story. When they finally meet, 2 years have passed since Victor was expelled from university. Now the creator and the creation stand face to face. But there is one very important difference between them. The creator never had a proper father, but the creature had spent nearly a year with the wise old man. The old man would tell him, "You are my friend." You may remember that he would gently caress him, and he taught him that famous idea forgiveness is the highest wisdom. Yet the creature was the product of a love that was never truly understood, and that love was never properly expressed. As a result, he became a mixture of love, anger, and the same ambition Victor possessed. In truth, Victor became the real monster. It was Victor who created the true hell. But the creature forgave Victor. Because of this, Victor called him son, and Victor died in peace. The main reason the creature could forgive Victor was that he first accepted himself. Once he accepted himself, he was able to face Victor and forgive him. By the end of the story, the equation of God and man is reversed. The creation becomes better than the creator. It is he who truly possesses the ability to love. This is where the final act of the story begins. Now it is time for destinies to be decided. Elizabeth's death causes both the creature and Victor to chase each other to the horizon. What does horizon? It represents the ultimate end of everything. There is a famous saying that God is beyond the horizon, and the ship that was trapped in the ice was named Horizon. The creature truly goes beyond the horizon to meet his God.
Their meeting becomes the central message of the story. When they finally meet, 2 years have passed since Victor was expelled from university. Now the creator and the creation stand face to face. But there is one very important difference between them.
The creator never had a proper father, but the creature had spent nearly a year with the wise old man. The old man would tell him,
You are my friend. You may remember that he would gently caress him, and he taught him that famous idea.
Forgiveness is the highest wisdom. Yet the creature was the product of a love that was never truly understood, and that love was never properly expressed. As a result, he became a mixture of love, anger, and the same ambition Victor possessed. In
Victor
truth,
became the real monster. It was Victor who created the true hell, but the creature forgave Victor. Because of this, Victor called him son, and Victor died in peace. The main reason the creature could forgive Victor was that he first accepted himself.
Once he accepted himself, he was able to face Victor and forgive him. By the end of the story, the equation of God and man is reversed. The creation becomes better than the creator. It is he who truly possesses the ability to love. But if you remember,
when Victor was talking with Elizabeth about the butterfly, he didn't understand her at all. Elizabeth kept saying that the butterfly is a symbol of life, but Victor only saw it as a biological specimen. He was viewing the world through science without spirit.
That's why he believed that by stitching together pieces of corpses, he could create life. But Elizabeth insisted that life means transforming from a caterpillar into a butterfly. That is the true meaning of
and
life.
such a transformation can never happen by assembling dead body parts. This is the message the director wanted to convey throughout the entire film. True hell is created by someone who cannot express love, like Victor's father.
and that God exists among human beings when people show empathy and kindness to one another. The novelist conveyed the same message in a different way within the story. By creating a deep tragedy, she aimed to deliver this message. At the end of the novel,
After Victor dies on the ship, the captain hears a sound. He goes and sees the creature standing over Victor's body crying, and he delivers his famous line, one of the saddest moments in literary history. He says,
I never wanted to commit evil, but I was driven to revenge by rejection and loneliness. I wanted to be loved, but I saw nothing from the world except hatred, and now my creator is dead, and I have no reason to exist. That is how the novel ends.
It is so tragic that the author ensures her message is fully delivered. Because the creature was never loved, all this tragedy was created. This message even affects the captain of the story. In the end, he abandons his boundless
and he
ambition.
decides not to play God anymore. Well, friends, that concludes this analysis of the film Frankenstein. If you found this video interesting or helpful, don't forget to like it. And until the next deep dive on the channel, goodbye.